Hi, I'm continuing this series with these new videos on parents who have children with borderline personality disorder. These are children who may be adolescents or even young adults or even older adults. And these videos are meant to help the parents understand how to cope as caretakers, but also in understanding their child's mental health issues, how to maintain the parent's own personal dignity and contentment in their lives. The first set of videos I did was based on my book, Borderline Personality Disorder, Survival Guide from Chaos to Authenticity. What I'd like to talk about today is something that is not very popular to talk about, but it needs to be approached in a very mature way. Last week we spoke about how it's very important for the parent to understand that they are a good caretaker, that they're doing their best. The child has behavioral dysfunction, emotional challenges, developmental issues, all sorts of problems as a individual with borderline personality disorder. And what I'd like to talk about today is, as I said, something that's not usually talked about but needs to be spoken about, and that is that the parent should be realistic about the borderline child's abilities, about the borderline child's challenges, and so on. We all have hopes and dreams for our children, and often we project onto our children some of our own hopes and dreams for ourselves in the ways that, perhaps we have felt that we've let ourselves down academically, socially, or otherwise, athletically. We didn't maybe accomplish a lot of sports or athletics as in our youth, and so we want our child to be very sports oriented or an athlete. And when you have a child with borderline personality disorder, it's important to understand the child's limitations and to mourn the reality that that child, and particularly when that child becomes a young adult, that he or she may not accomplish as much as you did and may not accomplish as much as the other children in the family or perhaps extended family members, nieces and nephews, and so on. The behavioral issues, the cognitive issues, the emotional issues, and all the other issues that we spoke about in my other set of videos outlining the criteria of borderline disorder, both within DSM-5 and supplementary criteria that I included, which I think are absolutely essential to understanding borderline functioning, point to the reality that these challenges taken together, that is cumulatively, very negatively impact the individual. And that has nothing to do with the individual being young. That would impact any individual at any age, in any family, in any culture. There's one caveat I really want to stress here, and that is you would be surprised at how children can surprise you. I think within my own family, within clients I've known, and so on, where you see a child who, in an earlier stage of development, they're perhaps socially awkward, and then they get to middle or high school and they have a whole group of friends. You have a child who seems, somewhat klutzy and uncoordinated, and again, as they grow up as an adolescent or young adult, they find a groove in sports or athletics that can be quite surprising. Children surprise you. And they surprise you because when you're an adult, your change between age 25 and 30, or between 30 and 35, or even between 35 and 50, may actually be very, very modest. As adults, we remain somewhat consistent in our lifestyle, often within our jobs, family, proclivities, and so on, from not just year to year, sometimes from decade to decade. by definition, children are developing. So a child going from, grade 6 to grade 7, it's just a year. It doesn't sound a lot to us as adults, but try and remember back the significant difference in that 1 year of development. So for children, a few years of development, even sometimes a few months, can bring significant changes and sometimes new challenges and new obstacles in their lives. The same is true with borderlines, and this is an important caveat I want to stress, that although your child may have all sorts of problems as a borderline and perhaps they're getting help as they appropriately should, you'd be surprised that borderlines also, like all children who go through adolescence and young adulthood, grow out of things in a very positive way. It's not unusual for borderlines to find that if they find one or two good friends as in high school or as young adults, it can substantially improve their socialization and their self-esteem. You find that borderlines, again, as adolescents or young adults who may have had learning problems or focus problems and so on, in addition to the BPD, may find that they find their groove academically in an area that perhaps they didn't consider. Or they find perhaps a hobby or activity that not only does it bring them enjoyment and personal self-satisfaction, but it may be something that they can build as a real professional career, allowing not only allowing them to work, but to gain, good remuneration, and they can have a decent lifestyle. So it's important to balance mourning and understanding in context the very serious issues that your child with borderline personality disorder encounters throughout adolescence and young adulthood, while also understanding that, like any other developing human, your child may surprise you. Your child may find very positive and healthy ways to cope and to defend themselves from sad feelings and nervousness in a way that allows them a very positive life. And just like, your normal child at age 14 and then at age 24 will look like two completely different human beings, your child with borderline personality disorder at age 14 and age 24, 10 years later, may also look like two completely different human beings. With normal children, we have fantasies about how that child will grow and develop. And what I would say is, while we want to be cautious with any child with any kind of disorder or illness, we don't want to completely negate the possibility that your child with BPD still has all sorts of potential, and that problems that they have can be mitigated or understood in proper context in a way that allows them to grow and develop. Professional support is extremely important. Professional support for the individual child, for the family, academic support, even support developmentally, and so on. It's crucial, again, to balance these two disparate things. And it's very hard because when the borderline child is doing horribly poorly, often for several reasons combined, as a parent, you think to yourself, how is this child ever going to be a self-sufficient adult? But the reality is, if you look at borderline personality disorder follow-ups, with proper care, there is considerable hope. There are considerable professional and non-professional resources. And that individual will surprise you. The other thing I want to say about this is that sometimes when we have hopes and dreams for our children, especially those with problems, we want to provide them unlimited resources. So, a very typical example is a child with a learning disorder, specifically a specific learning disorder like math. So, you have the child benefit through remedial tutorial assistance with a math tutor once a week, maybe 5 times a week. Um, and in most cases, there's a real benefit to this. With children that have a particular disorder, such as borderline personality disorder, you don't want to overwhelm them. And by that I mean, while it's good to ensure that the child attends therapy, if there are learning issues, attend to that, and family therapy, whatever, you don't want to overwhelm the child with therapy. You don't want to overwhelm the child to the point that the child thinks that they're nothing but an object that requires constant assistance, constant support, constant reassurance. Because the truth is, that child, regardless of the issues that he or she has as a borderline, still has to grow and develop. And deep down, every individual wants to grow and develop. Every individual wants to form their own identity. Every individual wants a personal pathway that they pursue in their life, professionally, academically, socially, and whatever way. And sometimes very well-meaning parents, frankly, especially those who have, perhaps better financial resources, try everything and everything. And it comes from a good place within the heart of the parent. But at the same time, you don't want to overwhelm your child to the point that they feel very pathological, right? It's, it's like the helicopter parent who has a child, and the child loves to go out and play, all right? And every time the child comes home, the child has scratches and bruises. Maybe they're climbing mountains. I lived in an area when I was a child where there was a ravine with, it was very steep. There was a lot of trees and bushes, and I'd often come back with scratches on and all sorts of things. And, that was in an era when parents didn't really care and they didn't know where you were. But in the era of the helicopter parent, every time the borderline child gets a scratch or a bruise, obviously you want to inquire and check on the child, but don't over pathologize. As it is, you're mourning the child's limitations and you're putting into proper perspective what the child may or may not be able to achieve. But don't pathologize it in such a way that the child grows up feeling that he or she is pathological, that he or she is somehow sick or different, that he or she, every time the child looks in the mirror, as a result of the hovering parent, that the child says to himself, there's clearly something wrong with me. Why else would my parent be checking on me 20 times a day for 20 different things? Allow the child to make mistakes. Just like a normal child will make mistakes, a child with BPD will also make mistakes. Allow the child with BPD to make his own judgments and decisions, not because we want that child to fail, but because failure is part of development. And all children and even adults make some decisions that are better and make some decisions that are worse, make some decisions that are healthier and safer, and make some decisions which are less healthy and less safe. So I guess the bottom line, what I wanted to get across today is that it's extremely important to balance the hopes and dreams that you have for your child while also mourning the reality that your child may just not have the capacity to accomplish everything that either you have as a fantasy for that child or perhaps what that child wants for himself. Allow the child to grow and develop, even with BPD, through different stages of development so that he can try out different things and get a sense of his own strengths and his assets and what he can do so that he does not feel pathologized or put down or hovered upon every minute. Obviously, if your child is extremely impulsive and lives in a community with drugs or alcohol, you're going to be extremely worried that that child is involved with drugs and alcohol. But it's important to allow the child, even with BPD, to make mistakes on his own terms, with his own volition. Because if you don't, then the child will grow up without a sense of his own humanity. And that child will be unable to gain a sense of his own personal independence, agency, autonomy, and independence. Authenticity comes from honest expression about one's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And it's important that we balance our concerns for the child with borderline personality disorder with understanding that this is still a child. That with all the problems that this person has, this is still a child that we love and that we care for, and we want the very, very best for that individual.